indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, members present this evening are myself, Mayor Marl, Council members Gearboss, CO, McClellan, Mitchell, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar, and Councilwoman Dillon. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Treasurer Bennett, City Superintendent Engineer Rubel, as well as Wastewater Treatment Superintendent Skull. At this time, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended. There was one addition that I added earlier this afternoon, and you do have revised agendas in front of you. The new item is C-17-78, a motion to approve Mayor Marl's appointment of April Scarlett to the Cemetery Board of Appeals. And if there are no additional changes, again, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved, as amended.
Moved by Mr. Gearboss to approve as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by, I'll let Dylan be the second on that. I'll get you next time, Ms. McClellan. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we will proceed with presentations. We have a presentation from NOVA regarding the wastewater treatment filters, and we have several gentlemen here, including Mr. Loy from NOVA. Mr. Skull or Mr. Brian Rubel, do you want to introduce our guests and maybe make brief comment, and then we'll turn it over to them?
Good evening. Through discussions the last few months, I had been curious whether the City Council was interested in speaking directly with NOVA Technologies, the manufacturer of the filter at the wastewater plant. And Mr. Campbell and Mr. Marl thought that would be a fine idea to have these gentlemen come in today. So Mr. Loy is the president of NOVA. He has come here from Florida to meet you this evening. And accompanying him is Joe Moore, who works for Du Bois Cooper, who's a local manufacturer's representative in Plymouth, Michigan. And actually, Mr. Brill is from Weiss Construction. He thought he should be here in case there are any questions for Weiss tonight. So with that, then I'm going to turn the discussion over to Mr. Loy and Mr. Moore, and I'm sure they've reserved time to answer any questions you have at the end. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Rubel. Gentlemen, please, you're welcome to come forward to the podium. We're delighted to have you here this evening, and it was it's a pleasure speaking to you earlier this afternoon, and I look forward to your remarks. And when you have concluded, we will open it up for questions from the dais. Mr. Loy.
Thank you. The opportunity to speak here is, from my point of view, is a privilege. We were one of the vendors on the project and had the privilege of selling equipment to you. There have been some problems with the equipment. You may or may not be aware of how many of the details you want to know. Is not known to me yet, but I'm here to answer questions. What I intended to say as far as a message goes is that we take our responsibility as an equipment supplier very seriously in these matters. We have a reputation of good performance with the vast amount of equipment that we supply, and we've been doing this for many years. In looking at business as a financial relationship with a client, I think the greater issue here is the moral component of being an equipment supplier who enters into an agreement to be paid for an item that they provide. And I think the priorities there is our obligation first and foremost is to supply something that actually will do the job for which it was sold, and then to do it reliably over time. In the responses that we've had to the field problems that we've dealt with, our number one priority has always been the response to the client. We don't like to delay. We don't procrastinate. When somebody has a problem with something that we've made, we want to respond quickly, and we believe we've done that here. I wish that we would have been responding fewer times than what it's actually turned out. We've had a couple of problems that were repetitive, but in one of the more serious components of solving the problem was failure analysis, and failure analysis does consume some time. So between our responding to being informed that there was a particular problem, There were times where we simply replaced the part on the machine that was a problem, and then we needed time for failure analysis to determine what had actually gone wrong and to develop the root cause of the issue. So this expanded the number of weeks that it took in some cases to get the equipment back into working order. The failure analysis that we did conduct on a couple of the critical parts indicated that we had a quality control problem from one of our subcontracted vendors. And this ended up requiring us to make some design changes. And design changes like failure analysis do consume time. It's not something that we can necessarily get done in a day or two. So again, that expanded the number of weeks that were necessary to get the full cycle of the problem understood and corrected with a part that might have needed to be remade or a part that needed to be redesigned and then remade. We believe we've shown good faith, that we've continued to support the client, which in our case was Weiss Construction. We've wanted to show good faith by supporting the staff at the facility. And what we think we have done is to show that our commitment is long-term. We've been in this business for many years. We intend to fully stand behind the equipment in the future. The errors that we had in the manufacturing of the equipment had nothing to do with the contractor's work at the site. It had nothing to do with the engineering work that was done by Tetra Tech. This is a set of problems that we created through a couple of errors that we made, and anybody who might be looking to spread blame to the contractor or to the engineering firm is really being unfair in that regard. This is our issue. We created the problem, and we're the ones who are responsible to solve the problem. And the last thing I would say is that after taking a tour of the facility today, I was quite impressed that for the generation of various pieces of equipment that you have at the wastewater plant, some are newer, some are much, much older. I think the staff that you have there are doing a very good job, and they're getting all of the possible performance capability out of the equipment that I think they own. And I say this as somebody who's been in the wastewater treatment equipment business for more than 30 years. And I started in the business as a plant operations and maintenance guy myself. We've been in wastewater plants all over the United States for decades. These folks are doing a very good job, and we're really lucky as a vendor that we've had the Weiss people and we've had Mr. Skull and his crew to get the kind of cooperation that we've needed to get our problems resolved over there. And I'll open it up to questions.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Are there questions for our guest? Mr. Gearbaugh.
Just a couple. I mean, part of our concern was that we thought maybe some of the issues for you in manufacturing were our specs. Is that true, or was it more just on your side in terms of what we required to have installed?
No, we have the same equipment that you have here operating in many other facilities without issue. The problem here was something that we missed in the manufacturing of these two particular filters. This has nothing to do with the specifications.
And for our, I guess for our comfort and so forth, is to understand that the life expectancy, at least we know we have an extended warranty on this for a couple more years, but you feel confident that this will last the original period of time that we thought we were buying?
We do. We have machines of this similar type of concept which have been in operation for more than 10 years continuously and are reliable. Maintenance is always a component of ownership of equipment in a water or a wastewater utility, but the machines are made of stainless steel. They're heavy duty. The components are of industrial quality with proper care. These machines should easily last 15 to 20 years.
And our last issue that we had has been resolved, and how long has that been resolved?
Well, the last issue that you had involved a bearing that went bad on one of the machines, and it actually only went bad on one of the two machines. So filter number one was just repaired in totality last week. The other filter was operating correctly, but we replaced the parts on it that had gone bad on number one as a preventative measure. There was no indication there was any problems with the bearing parts on machine number two, but out of an overabundance of caution, we don't want to to leave that as an item that was not addressed.
Okay, and so you understand our concern that it seems that we've gone a month and then a problem happens, and then a month the problem happens.
Absolutely.
So do you feel that if something else happens, you would replace the entire product at some point or not?
Well, replacing the product is an easy thing to ask for, and it would be very easy for me to stand up here and say that we would do that. The reality is that the majority of the product is a static piece of machine. If you look at the brochures that we handed out, the filter itself is made up first and foremost of a tank. The tank receives water, the tank discharges water, if you will. So there's no mechanical function there. The cover system that contains the wash water activity when the machine is washing itself to clean out the particles that have been captured, that is a static function. The only working part of the machine is the inside wheel assembly that rotates, and we have at this point essentially replaced all of the mechanical parts that go into that wheel assembly. So you essentially, the machines on the outside look like they're the original machines, but on the inside, we've basically replaced everything in there that we believe can be a problem at this point. We actually went over and above what it is that needed to be replaced out of an abundance of caution, because we don't want you to have any more problems. It's time consuming for us. It creates a lot of stress for you, and we're going to increase the reserve of emergency parts at the plant so that any of these items that have previously become a problem, that we'll have that part at the plant in an emergency situation. And if it occurs again, and I'm hoping it doesn't, we'll come back up and we'll deal with it. But at this point, we're confident that we've done what was necessary to do to get the machines to be reliable.
And then just one last question. Have any of your other clients experienced a similar type of failure or problem?
As the ones that were experienced here,
Right.
You had a couple of unique things that happened here that we have not had happen other places.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? Ms.
I
McClellan?
just want to make a comment that I appreciate that you coming and your responsibility in, kind of going over this with us and just taking responsibility. It's refreshing to see, a company that's going to take responsibility for their product and not throw the blame on somebody else. So I appreciate that. And then you just answered the question that I was going to ask about whether or not you had other clients that had this particular issue. So were there two separate things? You said that ours had a unique thing, but were there something else that has happened to other clients?
If you don't know the details of what goes on inside the machine, it would be very difficult for me to explain to you in a brief sentence or two. There's a major component at the end of the rotating assembly. We had a crack formed in one of them on each of the two machines. We have not had that problem anywhere else. So, and again, out of an abundance of caution, there were 4 of those parts total between the two machines. We replaced all 4. Only 2 of them actually had trouble, but we didn't want to take the chance that we could have a problem in the future. What we want more than anything else is we want to be able to come back here with other potential clients in the future and be able to have them speak to the people who run the facility or speak to the people at Tetra Tech and be confident that we can get a positive recommendation from them for having solved the problem, restored reliability, and having good long-term performance at the plant.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Mr. Seo and then Ms. Dillon.
I guess I just want to make this comment that, I go out and I buy a car, not that often, but I've done it enough times in my lifetime now to be familiar with how to go about that, and what to look for, and what to consider. Day-to-day items I buy, I've had enough experience. This is one of those items, as a council person, this is the first time I've ever purchased or been responsible on the purchasing side for one of those, and also wanted to proceed with an abundance of caution, as you say, to make sure that we were, I don't know you, sir, from anybody, and you know, you may be the most credible person in the business that there is out there. But I guess I want you to understand why we've hesitated to make the final payment until we were certain in our own minds that the thing was operating properly, because it's not something we're that familiar with, as you stated to Ms. McClellan. So that's the purpose, I guess, in our staying our hand in final payment.
When you work in our industry like I do, the most common form of getting someone's attention is to withhold their payment. I have already paid all of the costs of providing the filters, and as a manufacturer, it's my burden to carry the error that we made, and until I get all of you satisfied that we've met that threshold of burden, or what I like to call the evidence challenge of where is the proof that this will do what it's supposed to, we'd certainly like to get our final payment, but it's unrealistic to ask for it until we've met that challenge.
Mr. CEO, anything further?
No, sir, thank you.
Ms. Dillon?
This may have been asked earlier, just for clarification. Have you experienced issues with other facilities that we are not experiencing here? Have you had failures other places that we have not?
No, the term failure can be defined as a lot of ways. Wastewater equipment, and I don't know what your background is, wastewater equipment is exposed to some of the most challenging environmental conditions that you can put equipment through. It's an environment that has mechanical, electrical, hydraulic, and chemical corrosion potential. No one has a wastewater plant that doesn't have some kind of thing going on with every piece of equipment. Failure is when the equipment doesn't work. We had a failure here because the equipment would not do the job that it was supposed to do. In general, that's how I classify a failure. We don't have failures in other locations. People have maintenance issues from time to time. People have minor issues they deal with, but we don't have other people whose machines have broke and not been capable of running. That's what we had here. That's how I define a failure.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, do you, in your professional opinion, have a threshold? Do you think that if we can get to a certain point at, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, without any type of a failure or incident, that we're sort of over the edge? I mean, what has the record been for the failure? What's the general time frame?
It's really not possible, other than speculation, to put that kind of an answer in place. We have similar machines that are a couple of hours away from here in Dowagiac. Those machines have been running for months without any problems. Joe Moore with DuBois Cooper, we've sold equipment all over the state. Some of it's 5, 6, 7 years old, doesn't have problems. I won't be satisfied until these machines run for 6, 8, 9, 10, 12 months with no problems. That's, to me, that's the record that you want to have. Semi-annual maintenance, annual maintenance, this is part of the ownership of equipment like this, but we anticipate that we'll have completely reliable operation going forward.
Is there any kind of proactive maintenance or inspection going on so that we don't have a complete failure again?
Well,
Is there a
the
way of doing
failures that
that?
have taken place up to this point are, if you will, they're instantaneous type of events that have taken place. When this particular part suffered a crack in the weld, this isn't something that you see emerging weeks in advance. It happens and it's done. We've been sending our service manager up here on a regular basis, both for inspection and keeping an eye on the equipment. We're going to continue to do that going forward.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming here tonight.
Welcome.
Additional questions? Well, Mr. Lloyd, let me say this to sort of wrap up our conversation and dialogue this evening. First, I want to thank you and Mr. Moore for your time this afternoon, and actually all of these gentlemen for, attending this meeting this evening. As you and I discussed earlier, making sure that we invest prudently and strategically in our wastewater treatment plant. And of course, more broadly, issues relating to the maintenance of our wastewater infrastructure, as well as the distribution of clean water, are of paramount importance. That's perhaps one of the most basic things that we provide as a municipal unit of government. And our constituents, our utility users, should not only expect, but they should demand that we take these issues very seriously. And that we have thoughtful, protracted discussions about the decisions that we make. So again, on behalf of my colleagues, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for your commitment to making sure that this equipment that we did spend a lot of money on works. We have every reason to believe that in the future it will, with your support, with your cooperation, and we appreciate you taking time to address our questions and concerns. I know that if my colleagues have additional concerns or inquiries, I would encourage you to direct them to the city manager's office, and we will make sure that they're relayed to the appropriate individual. But again, gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your presentation this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? Please.
Hello. Thank you, everybody, for being here, taking your time. My name is Karen Kerrigan. I live at 212 West Henry Street on the corner of Monroe and Henry. And I saw later on, it's in the discussions at the end, so do I do this now
Yep,
or
it's
then?
enumerated
Oh,
as
perfect.
an item on the agenda. You're
We'll do
welcome
it
to
now
speak
and
now, as
get it
well as at the
started.
end, Karen.
And everybody can hear me okay, right? I'm not used to microphones. All right, so thank you for taking time to listen to our questions. A few key points that we have about the People's Park. The significant quality of life, the Saline residents, and the visitors to Saline. The primary value of the park in the green space, ability to accommodate many outdoor activities, like dog walking, jogging, kids walking outside their stroller, the parents pushing the stroller, cycling, running, wildlife, basic activities, some shape or form every day, every year. And we've heard that there's a parking lot coming in to take some of the green space. So we're trying to say that we'd like to find out more about this. And we're not happy with having that. We'd prefer it to stay green. The removal of the green space to accommodate parking lot will greatly impact the functioning of the park, the accessibility of many activities, thereby reduces utilization of the existing facilities. Over the past week, the on-street parking, because there's no longer on-site due to the new condominiums going in. The parking's been very sufficient on the side of the street, and it's actually, where did I lose my line here? Sorry about that. Accommodate the baseball activities with vehicles parked no further than 100 feet from the entrance to the People's Park. And this is the entrance of People's Park on Monroe Street, where I do know that there's one on the South Ann Arbor Street. And that there's still room for additional vehicles for parking. Over the weekend, a few of the residents in the area have engaged with some of the other community members, and there are about 40 people, maybe more, maybe less, that have signed a petition opposing it, conversion of the green space. We understand that there's other issues, to digitally via the Saline Post that people weighed in on, Facebook and all the other social. Do you want the list of the petitioner names?
If you have those, we would
We
receive them
do.
for the record.
Okay. Do I just bring them up to you?
Please.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, come on, papers. Out of the,
Are there additional comments on agenda items? Thank you so much. Please, come forward to the podium.
Good evening. Cindy Coleman, 213 Monroe Street. I'm here just to voice the opinion. I'm opposed to the installation of a parking lot in People's Park. It's not a very large park to begin with. And I'd just like City Council to keep in mind when you're thinking about this proposal and making decisions that the additional 30 units of family that are being accommodated with the new condominiums are going to put additional stress and additional use into the park, which is great. And I think that green space is going to be at an added premium under that circumstance, because those are people who will not have properties adjoining the park, but actually will, be condominium dwellers, and will be looking for that space for use for recreation. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional citizen comments, please.
Andy Hatfield, 206 West Henry. This, I think, is somewhat loosely related to another issue I brought before the council regarding traffic calming on Henry Street. And as the city is concerned about the amount of parking in the downtown area, I would invite the city to look at both sides of Henry Street as potential parking spots. If we could ease up the south side of Henry Street, I think it would help to calm the traffic. It would overcome, and it's very, very close to People's Park, it would overcome some of the parking needs there. And just also, as you look at so many small towns that, when faced with a period of growth, have kind of destroyed their futures by paving over their downtown too much, I would invite the council to kind of research some sites. There are some easy sites like smalltowns.org that detail this problem very specifically. And I would be very concerned, aside from the fact that I'm a close resident, just in general for the future of Saline, if we do really want this to be a walking downtown, the best way to stop that, or to block that goal, is to create too many places, too many parking spots for cars to get their cars downtown rather than walking around. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional citizen comments, please?
Hi. I'm Kathy Radigan, 221 Monroe Street. I was reading about the Salt Spring Park and the planning that was done around that, and broke up into groups and discussed it, and came up with 10 of the leading most important points. And amongst the top 5 in the park connectivity was included preserving the natural features of the park. And I think putting a parking lot in is contrary to that. We're seeing already that the street is providing the space that's needed for the parking. And to take away more of the green space, possibly more of the trees, I think would be a detriment to what our city is looking for. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Tom Beltman, 217 Monroe Street, and I'm here to echo and support my neighbors' comments about preserving the green space at the park. I'm not real familiar with what the details are that the city is considering, so I can't speak specifically to what you have in mind. But I wondered if there's a couple of alternatives that I've considered or thought about since I've heard that that you're considering paving part of the park. Would be to use the tennis court, convert the tennis court into parking. I don't see that gets used very often, and it's already paved in not, it's not pavement, but it could be easily converted into parking. It could be accessed down the, next to the daycare. And then if safety is a concern for the people who do have to park in the street, maybe some of the city's resources could be spent on traffic or on speed control on Monroe. There's a lot of speeding on Monroe Street, so I could see where people might not feel safe parked in the street and cars are going by quickly, and maybe if we could reduce the speeds on Monroe Street through some traffic monitoring or speed monitoring, that might also help. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Any additional comments?
Hi, I'm Rosie Clandos, and I live at 200 West Henry. I'm probably the newest member of Saline here. I've lived here for 8 months, and before I arrived, I looked at the map and I looked at parks and green spaces. This was very important to me because I had been living in Boston, and there were plenty of green spaces there, and prior to that on the West Coast, and lots of spaces. So coming here, the big attraction was all the green spaces, and my first day when I checked out my apartment on the corner of West Henry Street was I walked around the corner and I saw that park, and I thought, great, my grandkids are going to play here. And they were just there today. And it's a different viewpoint from what everybody else has said, but aesthetically, it's just a beautiful town, and you have beautiful parks all around, and that one little cute park in the middle of this residential just really makes it much more homey and more inviting to all the neighbors to get out and congregate in a place like that. I would suggest you add park benches there, and if you do need some walkway from the street to the baseball diamond, put a little path in, put a little sidewalk in. Other than that, there's much parking available on Monroe Street alongside the cemetery, and perhaps they would like some visitor parking cars there. So thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Saline.
Thank you.
Additional comments? Any additional public comments? No, then we'll proceed to the consent. Well, first of all, thank you all. And of course, we will be discussing the matter that most of you spoke about at the end of the discussion portion of our agenda. We proceed now to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Seo. Is there a second?
Second.
It is moved by Seo to approve as submitted. Is that correct, sir?
Correct.
And seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Hearing no discussion, all of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business, item 17-74. This is building official appointment. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo dated April the 26th, 2017 from City Manager Campbell, and to make a conditional offer of employment for the position of building official/inspector to Steve Maciag, conditioned upon a satisfactory completion of a background investigation, physical, and drug screen.
Move to acknowledge receipt.
Thank you, Mr. Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. Mr. Campbell, do you care to comment on this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Roble can jump in if I miss anything. But I believe all council members met Steve prior to the work session. And so, but just to kind of outline the process, city staff went through, we accepted applications, resumes for the position of building official/inspector. As you may recall, our longtime building official inspector, Tillman Taylor, retired at the end of December. And so, moving forward, we conducted the interviews, and we had 4 quality candidates that kind of shook out, if you will, that we came in as finalists, and we are proposing to offer Steve that position. And of course, he's at the podium waiting any questions you might have. But just another little background is because of the city's charter and ordinance requires. This is one of the positions that requires official appointment by the council. So that's why it's coming before you all. Yes, it's an operational thing, but because they, like I said, the charter and the ordinance, that's why it's here. But again, we certainly, I know Gary and I both very supportive of this recommendation, and we're excited for the possibility. So happy to do our best to answer any questions, or certainly Steve is prepared to answer your questions as well.
Very good. Well, before we open it up for questions, Mr. Rubel, do you care to make any statement at this time?
Just to fill in some spots here in the process, as Mr. Campbell managed, we had a good search. We had a very good response, and so we had a large selection to choose from. And as you mentioned, the qualified people sort of rose to the top as usual, and he certainly was one that caught our eye. And even though I should mention, he has less than 2 years of direct hands-on experience with it. He's been associated with the field for 30 years, working with others in the trades and in building construction and trade construction, and helped his neighbors and friends in their projects. I found out through interview checking reference and so forth, and I got glowing remarks on his references. So certainly of all the items you see in the job description and the 53 items in the supplemental A items, which we tried to cover the whole gamut of extra duties besides the essential duties. And so he either was positive in most of those, or certainly displayed the capability, the intellect, and so forth, initiative. He's self-motivated to easily gain, the experience in those under, direct supervision.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Rubel. Well, Steve, we are delighted to have you here this evening. For our audience's benefit, we have some members of the press who I'm sure will be reporting on this. Do you want to maybe speak briefly about your background and share any other pertinent information that you deem appropriate?
Yeah, I've been in the home improvement business for over 30 years, and that's the experience I'm going to bring to the building department here. Working with contractors, homeowners, and then having the limited experience in the building field, inspections. I've moved up pretty good in the last little over a year with the mechanic company, and I think I'll do pretty good with this city, Saline.
Very good. Well, again, we're delighted to have you here. Are there questions for either staff or our prospective building inspector? I'm sorry, Ms. Tahar.
Yes, thank you. So I wondered, I probably could have looked this up for myself, but I confess I didn't. What are the requirements for receiving the certification from the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Bureau of Construction Codes?
2016 that it changed. You are just required to prove that you're a qualified candidate opposed to taking the 60-hour test. So my resume that was sent into the state was a 40-page resume, so I tried to prove that I was a qualified candidate.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions? Any subsequent comment? Ms. Dillon.
I do, and this is for city staff. I noticed that we're still at a 6-month severance. Is that still viable at this point? I just feel like that's excessive.
That's been continued to be the policy. Staff or council has not provided staff with any contrary direction.
Okay. And then in the compensation under the employment contract, it's showing for 2016-2017 fiscal year, beginning June 1st of 17. So is he coming in at this and then looking at getting an immediate raise?
So the answer to that is yes. So we could hold off 30 days and wait for that second step to increase 2.5%, or we could hire at the current step. So either way, that step would increase. And so my preference, my recommendation would be to not wait additional 30 days, because obviously we need the assistance. I know Gary is down in the building engineering department most days a lone ranger, and that's that's getting very burdensome. But in any case, we certainly could do that if that's the council's desire, but I would propose that we would hire him as we're being proposed. So in all actuality, because of the way the charter and the ordinance read, I would actually prefer just to do a 14-month agreement, but because of the way it reads, we have to do a 1 month for the rest of this fiscal year, and then you would have a separate, another 12-month when you have in June, when you get the regular non-union contracts for consideration.
Okay, and your preference is to do a 14-month at this point?
I would like to,
versus having like a 30-day contract, like probationary period type?
That's my preference, but because of the requirements in the charter and the ordinance, we cannot.
Right.
If we could, I would have. That's what you would see before you. But that's why we have the shortened time. But again, I mean, it's an at-will position, so that position, if it's not working out, then it can be separated from employment with the city. So it's, I mean, as an at-will employee, just like the rest of us non-union folks, I mean, that's always a possibility.
Okay. So just for clarification, are you saying that he will get a compensation increase in 30 days?
That's correct.
From where he's at here?
Correct. It would be the 2.5% that the rest of staff is getting. But like I said, it would, so we could wait 30 days and not have him work for us for the month of June until July 1st, where that step would increase to 2.5% automatically.
Okay. I'm just unclear as to why he's getting stepped immediately.
He's staying at the same step, but the step is increasing. It increases, he would receive the COLA. He's not getting a step after 30 days.
Okay, so, okay.
Right, he's
So
staying at the
that's
same step,
different.
he's getting the COLA.
Okay, so it's a
I apologize if I
COLA.
wasn't.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
ma'am.
you.
Yes, ma'am.
Additional questions? Mr. Gearbox.
Just a few, and we had chatted beforehand. I know that your company that you used to work for, do you still have any, I guess, involvement in the ownership and running of it from day to day, just because of our concerns with having to look at conflict of commitment and interest so far? How would you deal with that in terms of coming to work for us, or are you completely separated from that at
I'm
this point?
completely separated from that. I didn't. I did not renew the Macy Ag Improvement license.
Okay. And my only other question is, just from our own perspective, how do you see Saline as being a town that's different than maybe a Birmingham or Trenton, or where else you've worked in terms of helping us achieve our goals of code enforcement, building inspection, and making sure that we do what we need to do?
Well, this town's completely different than two of the communities that I do work in. I do like what I've seen, and I've only been here a couple times, and each time I come into the town, I see something different. So I am excited to come work for Saline, and as those issues come up, I'll be happy to address them and help the homeowners of this town.
Well, that's good to hear, because I want somebody that has eyes wide open and seeing everything that's going on, because for me, and I think other members of our council, we would appreciate having that. My only comment for Ms. Dillon on her item, although we probably can move forward, I don't have an issue with the way the contract's proposed. We could, before the July 1st renewals, consider how we handle the 6-month severance in the fact before we do those contracts. So if we wanted to adjust that for the coming year, we could discuss that at that point.
Let me stay on that matter for just a moment, since two of my colleagues brought it up, and my position on the 6-month severance actually is not evolved, and it was pretty emphatic when I first articulated it back in 2009. I've never been in favor of a 6-month severance. Would other members besides myself and Mr. Gearbaugh and Ms. Dillon be interested in having a discussion about that in the future? Ms. Mitchell, yes? Yes. Ms. McClellan, yes. Mr. Har?
Emphatically, yes.
Yes. Mr. CO?
I'd be willing to discuss it, but I think I have a different opinion.
Okay, fair enough. Well, we will add that then at a future meeting. Anything else for Steve or for staff regarding the building official's position? No? Steve, thank you very much. Appreciate your time this evening. Is there any subsequent discussion on the motion moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt? No? Then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, we look forward to working with you. We move on to new business item 17-75. This is amendment to the Teamsters defined contribution agreement. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo dated April the 21st, 2017 from Treasurer Bennett, and to approve or not to approve the amendment to the Teamsters defined contribution agreement with MERS, and to authorize or not authorize the mayor to sign the agreement.
Move to acknowledge the receipt at this point.
Okay.
Give a chance to discuss.
Moved by Gearboss, seconded by, was that CO?
No, sir, I was going to move.
Okay. How about, is there a second to acknowledge receipt?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. Ms. Bennett, the floor is yours, and I'm going to excuse myself and have Ms. Tahar take over the meeting for just a moment.
Okay, this is just a general housekeeping issue. Back in 2008, as you all may recall, we changed the retirement benefits for new hires in the Teamsters contract, and we changed them to a defined contribution. At that time, the contract that was drafted by MERS had an addendum added to it that said if either or, that they could contribute to the MERS defined contribution, or they could contribute and have their match put into a 457. As you may recall, I've come to you a couple of different times with MERS benefits as we're going through and trying to tidy up everything. MERS determined that technically to keep the defined benefit, to be able to have our defined benefits and not have them fully funded, we would have to have this defined contribution in place as a, the word I want is, it is an assured retirement. It's a guaranteed retirement. And if we just put it into a 457, there's risks associated with that. So they wanted, and most of our employees are contributing, wanted to contribute to the MERS anyway, but because the language said or the 457, we amended the MERS contract to take out the or, and so that new hires have to go to the defined contribution. That was a lot of words, sorry.
No, that was helpful, because that's what I was trying to understand exactly how that played.
It was just cleaning up the language from the original MERS contract. The intent, nothing has changed, it's just making sure that there's no confusion as to what the benefit is.
Other questions for Treasurer Bennett? Mr. Gill?
Okay. Have we always had all ours be automatic immediate vesting? Are all our plans that way?
No, just for the defined contribution, because it's the employee is contributing their portion.
piece.
So they would get that, yes. Our defined benefit plans is a 6-year vestment.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Dillon, did you have a?
I did. On page 3 of 5, number 2, where it says employer contribution, star 5 to 10%. What does that mean?
So for the Teamsters contract, it's a match. That if the Teamster puts in 5%, the employee matches 5, but we'll only contribute up to 10, but it's a match. So it's a 5% or a 10%, whatever, or 7, whatever. So it's 5 to 10, no more.
Okay.
Additional questions, Mr. CO?
I'm sorry, I got lost in your original explanation.
Oh, I wonder how.
Are you saying it's an either or it's only?
It is only to the MERS defined contribution. Originally, the MERS language said either or, and then MERS later, and I agreed, we all agreed, it was intended to be just to the MERS defined contribution. So we amended taking out the or.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any subsequent discussion on the motion moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon, to simply acknowledge receipt? No, then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. How about a motion now to approve or not to approve, and to authorize or not to authorize?
I'll move to approve and authorize.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mitchell. Is there a second? Seconded by CO. Very good. Any additional questions? Any subsequent discussion? No, then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Mitchell, seconded by CO to approve and to authorize. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Bennett.
The only thing I would, as I stated, we are cleaning up all the language, so I will be coming back with probably other bargaining units for this exact same purpose, just so you're aware.
Thank you. We move on now to new business item 17-76. This is septage receiving costs. So this will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo dated April the 25th, 2017 from wastewater treatment superintendent Skull, and to approve or not to approve an increase for disposal of septage from 0.065 a gallon to 0.08 a gallon.
Move to acknowledge and to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded, was that Tahar?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Motion moved to acknowledge and to approve. Mr. Skull, do you care to make any comment? Pretty self-explanatory, but you might want to give a bit of history and context that would be helpful not only for council but also to the audience.
Sure. I originally proposed this change with the last fee book changes, but I dropped the ball on it and it didn't happen. So I'm just bringing it here as a house cleaning issue. Our increase in cost on the biosolids, again, it went up 22%, so we're going to push that cost on to the septic haulers. That's all I have.
Did you want to, maybe briefly touch on how that compares to other municipalities or units that accept septage?
Sure. We are currently towards the higher end of it with the 8%, with the 8 cents a gallon. Currently, there's only 2 plants in Washtenaw County that accept septage. One is our facility and the other one is YCUA. They're at 7 cents a gallon. They don't have the same disposal fees that we have, so they have an economy of scale going. I have already let the haulers know before they started dumping. Another mistake on my part, I put in the letters that were saying we're open was 8 cents because I assumed it was until I checked the fee book. And we have all the business we can handle, so I don't think it's going to have a negative impact.
Okay. And I'm sure you'll keep us in the loop as things progress and develop if this change is implemented. Are there questions for Mr. Skull? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just that question, if we do get a lot of business coming in, do we have a commodity to which, are we recovering our costs in full?
Oh, yes.
That you feel we are?
We are. We've turned the station on about 2 weeks ago, and we're about $9,000 for the last 2 weeks of April, so it's very profitable. The new equipment seems to be working great. There's a few software errors that's going to be addressed next week.
And we've had no odor concerns or complaints at this point?
I have not heard any direct complaints because of the septage. I know we're going to discuss that later, but no, I have not had anybody in particular mention that it was the septage.
Or any spill or anything around it?
No, actually, we got a much cleaner system we had before.
Perfect. Thank you.
Additional questions? Any subsequent discussion? Ms. Tahar?
I would just add, I reached out to someone I know who lives near the wastewater treatment plant who stated that they could tell septage was being received because they noticed a somewhat of an increase in odor. I encouraged them to call and report that.
Yeah, well, just to make it clear, that the hours of accepting septage is from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon for the sole purpose of having it. Usually by then we're closed anyway for it, but to minimize any impact that it may have. And they don't deliver on Sunday at all, and Saturday has even more limited hours.
Right. Well, as I said, I encouraged them to call. Apparently they didn't, so.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Mayor Pro Tem, because as you'll recall, when we reviewed preliminary data relating to the odor analysis, actually, I think we owe it to ourselves to accept outside septage because we don't have any data relating to whether this has an impact on offensive odors. So, as Mr. Skull indicated, this is something of a cash cow for us. And we've got entities that need to dispose of septage, but we want to be cognizant of what sort of impact it's having on the odors that are emitted from the plant. So this is a good opportunity now for us to have that data and be able to review it when we receive our final analysis from Webster Environmental. Anything else, Mr. Schall?
No.
No? Okay. Anything else from the dais, Ms. Dillon?
Just one thing is, not trying to price gouge, but can we raise that price up any higher? I mean, it is a supply and demand if there aren't a lot of places, to offset some of our other costs.
There's no reason we couldn't, other than it's a purely business-driven question for the haulers.
Right.
If
Because
we-
right now, we're just making 1%, correct? Because if there was a 22% increase in our cost, and we've
No.
only raised our fees 23%.
Right, but we were making a profit beforehand. I just wanted to ensure that that profit would be continued with
Okay.
the increased cost of the biosolids hauling.
Okay.
Anything else? Any subsequent discussion? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Tahar, to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Moving on to new business item 17-77, this is FY18 strategic plan. This will be a motion to approve or not to approve the proposed strategic plan as presented.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar, and that was seconded by McClellan. Thank you, ma'am. Staff care to make any comment?
No, just if there's questions, as you may recall, we submitted this to council a few weeks ago to review and think about and see if there's any changes that you all wanted to see. And so now for your consideration to approve.
And once approved, we put hard copies in the lobby, and then there's also an electronic version online. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Any questions for staff? Any discussion? I think this turned out very nice, based on the feedback that we received not only from citizens, but also from council members. If there's nothing further, then we'll proceed to vote. Tahar moved and seconded, and McClellan seconded to approve the strategic plan as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to the discussion portion of our agenda. First up is commission, committee, and task force reports from council members. Ms. McClellan, please.
Just want to report out that we had an Arbor Day celebration on Friday for the Parks Commission, and it was wonderful. We had Mr. Marshall's fourth grade class was there. Mayor Morrow gave a presentation, and Jim Peters did a nice job telling the kids about trees and how big they were and how far they'd fall if they were going to fall. It was great. And
You took some very nice pictures.
took some
that
pictures
people
on,
can,
yeah, they were
can
on
review
Facebook.
online.
I'm trying to get them onto the city's Facebook page if you'd like to look at those. And also, Youth Council met last month, and they are starting to wrap up for the year because they will all be, the seniors will be graduating. We have a good crowd of juniors that will be returning next year, hopefully. And so they're going to be working on elections next month and for chair people, and that's about it.
Very good. Additional committee, commissioner, task force reports. Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
Yes, thank you. I have two. First of all, the Environmental Commission sponsored the e-waste recycle day on Saturday. It was a great success. Last year, there were 223 cars counted coming in. This year, the unofficial car count is cars and walk-ins, one of which was a little red wagon, to my delight, was just over 400. And the event was free to the public, but there was the opportunity to make a donation to support the Fifth Corner. Last year, the donations were $1,175. The unofficial total this year is $2,192. So it was, and we will receive from the recycling company a report on how many tons, I assume tons, it seemed like tons of material were brought in, but we don't have that number yet. So it was a very successful event. So thanks for everyone who volunteered to help out, and also to everyone who recycled. The Arts and Culture Committee is about, along with Saline Main Street, is about to, sometime this month, we expect to install and unveil 4 works of art in the downtown area. It's in our Art Around Saline project. So 4 local artists' works were selected to be reproduced on a large scale for public display. And the idea, for those who don't know, the idea for this came from our unsuccessful attempts to participate, to be chosen by the Detroit Institute of Arts for their Inside Out art program. And as we discussed it, we decided we should just do our own. And so we're very excited. The artworks, the reproductions of the artworks are currently in my garage, as a matter of fact, so I've seen them where frames are being built for them, and they are absolutely gorgeous. So we're very excited about this.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any additional committee, commission, or task force reports? Ms. Mitchell and then Mr. Gearbaugh.
Thank you. We had another meeting of our non-discrimination ordinance task force. We are finalizing our draft, and we're planning a path for some public meetings on that. We attended, a number of us attended an autonomous vehicle seminar to gather some information and help our city as we make that transition over the next 40 years. And there were some interesting learning opportunities there. I also attended the River Raisin Watershed Delegates meeting this past week, and that was a very productive meeting. I want to note that they have adapted non-discriminatory language in their information and their setup, so I think that points us well, and thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yeah, I just want to touch base a little bit. On Planning Commission, the Maple Cove development, although it was postponed, we did get another proposal which addressed some of the concerns that had been presented by the neighbors. Part of it will be is that they're reducing the number of units and then also addressing moving some of the parking and so forth. So we're hoping that comes back on May 24th for a full presentation so that the neighbors and everyone can see it. And then the other aspect was the master plan. The other bodies of government are reviewing it, but we would also like to recommend that council, again, look at it in case they see any errors or problems. I know it's a long read, but we all have looked at it a couple times, but would always prefer to have another set of eyes check it out. Thank you.
Very good. Anything else on the commission, committee, or task force front? Ms. Dillon?
The Saline Drug Force Task Force continues to meet monthly, and we are excited that we just received a grant, so we've got a couple of projects and programs in the works right now, so hopefully announcements will be coming out shortly about those.
Very good. Anything else on commission, committee, or task force reports? How about reports or other announcements? Ms. Tahar?
Yes, the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan organization of great virtue and long life, is working, co-sponsoring with Saline Indivisible and Stronger Together a public meeting on redistricting in Michigan. Why should you care? This will be held on Wednesday, May 17th at the Community Health Pavilion at Evangelical Homes of Michigan, right here in Saline. It's from 6:30 till 8:30, and I'll just read their little blurb. Both major parties have manipulated elections to benefit politicians and ignore the will of the people. In fact, Michigan is now one of the worst states in the, it's not stated by who holds this opinion, but Michigan is now one of the worst states in the union when it comes to gerrymandered or manipulated legislative districts and elections. So this is an informational program to learn more about exactly what the state of gerrymandering is in the state of Michigan and what might be done to correct some of the problems. So once again, that's Wednesday, May 17th at 6:30 at EVH.
Thank you. Any additional announcements? Okay, then we proceed to the wastewater treatment plant update. Mr. Scull? Talked a lot about this issue again tonight. It's good.
There's really nothing to report as far as the odor study goes. They're going to wait. We're still waiting for the weather to warm up for the second round of testing. We do plan on having our sludge hauled out, so there may be some increased traffic, maybe a little bit of noise, but that's usually during business hours. Hopefully that'll be within the next 2 weeks. I did receive one complaint through Tetra Tech for the odor, and I also received a phone call from a local resident regarding the odor. So I did receive 2 in the last month.
And both, if I recall from our conversation earlier today, both of those 2 are within very close proximity
Yes, they
to
are.
the plant.
They share a fence row.
Okay, and I received 1 call as well, or a text message, excuse me. So I think we're up 3 from our last meeting.
Yeah.
Any questions for Mr. Scull? And again, we would encourage our residents, if you do have concerns or complaints, to still utilize our contact at Tetra Tech.
Or they
That
call me.
information- Or to call Bob directly. That information is very, very helpful to us. Thank you, Bob. Mr. Campbell, do you want to initiate a conversation on People's Park, a proposed permanent parking lot?
Sure. I'll try and make it brief, but just a little context, a little history. So I believe it was about 1996, City Council began leasing property on an annual basis that's adjacent to People's Park, which was part of the, as it was formerly known as the Karpinski property. And you may recall seeing those row of signs that said, don't park beyond here, because the actual property line is not too far from the actual tennis court, so there's not really a place to park vehicles or even travel through. So since about 96 until about, I think it was 2011 when the city purchased the Karpinski property, we leased that. The city leased that for parking purposes for access to People's Park. And in about 2008 or 9, somewhere in that area, the property owners increased the lease, and at that time the city council was considering not paying it and not having that area to park. But then SYB&S, the baseball, softball folks, they came along and they helped participate. They participated in the paying of that annual lease. And so then, of course, once the city owned purchased the property in 2011 or so, we didn't have to lease that. We were able to use that parking. And then you also may recall in the initial, when the city council proposed that property for sale, we proposed to keep, I think it was about a 50-foot wide or so strip, so people could at least go in, drop off people or equipment, turn around, and then go park on the street. However, you may also recall that High Meadows, for the developer for the new condominiums, they said, well, no, they need absolutely all that property. So now that they're developing that property, there's no longer that place that you can't use any even to pull in or park or anything. So actually, I believe it's about 2006. Is that correct, Gary? I think it's about 2006 that the idea from council was to look at developing a parking area on the south side there of the park, and so those have been looked at periodically since then. And now, again, the thought has been that to utilize, to potentially move that forward. And initially on the agenda before we removed it was the consideration to assign design of that parking area, proposed parking area. And so, again, I guess my recommendation would be that since it is a park that we're talking about, that we have the discussions at the park with staff and the neighborhood and come up with, is it a parking area? Is it, one of the residents proposed a path possibly, but certainly there's benefits to all the comments that were made this evening. But anyway, so that would be my thought, is to take it to Parks Commission and work with those folks to see what we could come up with.
Thank you. And let me add this, that the recommendation that our city manager just offered is is one that I feel very emphatic about, and I would actually ask for a comment from Councilwoman McClellan, our Parks Commission liaison. We've appointed over the past several years some really competent, quality people to our Parks Commission, and they're sort of our front line as it relates to the promotion, maintenance, and future of our parks. And so I think it would be improper to take any formal action without having a robust discussion first at the Parks Commission. Of course, those are public meetings. You can invite the neighbors, anybody else that you deemed appropriate to attend, and then to make a formal recommendation to council as to what we can do as it relates to parking at People's Park, but perhaps more importantly, what does the future look like for that particular space? Because it is important, it is well used. So I don't know if you have any objections to that, but unless there's dissent from the dais, I'd like to make sure that that's added as a discussion item at a future Parks Commission meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think, there's multiple things to think about when we're talking about access to the park and the green space, and I think the Parks Commission has been very thoughtful about other parks and how they should function and how, what their impact on the neighborhoods are, what the impact to the park is. So I would see that would be the same for this, taking all of the factors involved and making wise choices based on all the factors involved and kind of studying it.
Councilwoman, when is the next Parks Commission meeting?
Good question.
Is it the third Tuesday or fourth Tuesday?
Third, I believe.
The third.
Yes,
Tuesday
I don't have it on I didn't bring my calendar. The one week I didn't bring my calendar. You have it on there?
Give me a date. Somebody give me a date, please.
Sorry.
Second, I'm looking.
Third Tuesday.
That's what I think is the third. Sorry.
Grab my calendar.
I can get it to load.
Sorry. I have a paper calendar and I didn't bring it tonight, so.
The 16th.
The 16th,
Okay.
yep. At 7 p.m., I believe?
Yeah, it is
Yes.
7 p.m. here in council chambers. Do you see any reason why that could not be added as a discussion item?
No.
Okay. So council members are encouraged to attend. Will you or Ms. Scruggs be able to present this issue to the Parks Commissioners on, what was that date again, the 16th?
May 16th.
The 16th?
Certainly.
Okay. Is there any objection to utilizing that approach? No? Okay. Excellent. Very good. All right. And of course, if the group wants to be a little bit more thoughtful and continue the discussion in June, that's perfectly acceptable.
And that may well happen, but I
Okay.
encourage all the residents that were here tonight to come to that meeting or to reach out to me, or Neil Mormon is the Parks Chair for that commission, so.
Very good. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just one thing, also, when you're talking about parking lots, also consider Wilderness Park and Salt Springs, all three of those together.
Yeah, Salt Springs has already been kind of thought
Discussed.
through and discussed, but Wilderness, certainly we can start thinking about that as well.
Okay.
Ms. Mitchell, did you have something?
I did. This is new to my radar because I think the discussion happened before I was on city council. I don't have any idea of how many spaces the proposed parking lot is to be. Could you answer that question?
I think it's about 25, 20 or 25.
That's correct. The concept is about 25, but until we were going to do the preliminary design and find out actually what's feasible, fits, and works best, and take that to the parks. But if you want to start with the basic discussion level now, go back and start that, then we'll do the preliminary, thinking after that.
Please.
So my thought is I've had a fair number of discussions in the community about this, both from people who want the parking lot because they're concerned about unloading children on street parking, and neighbors, some of whom I don't think are entirely disinterested, about opposing a parking lot there. So I look forward to having the parks folks discuss that. I wonder, I have had a fair number of people say they were surprised by this information, and because we are certainly developing more in our city, I wonder if there is a better way to talk to people or make people aware about issues such as these. I don't know what the normal, but I certainly I wouldn't want to be surprised by something happening in my neighborhood, and I think it's fair to have, to talk about our procedures of notice and maybe look at those and how we could make that a little bit more clear.
Sure, and that's certainly a conversation we can have in the future.
And just from a park standpoint, that did happen. We just had a public forum about the Salt Springs Park, March, I believe. I think it was March 21st, where the public and the neighbors were invited to give opinions and thoughtfulness to the planning of that park. So I think that is happening. It's just sometimes maybe you're not seeing it because it's not directly affecting your neighborhood. So,
But feel free, on that point, feel free to promote this upcoming Parks Commission meeting. If there are people who are genuinely passionate about this issue or have an opinion, we can structure a meeting in such a way that people feel really comfortable and able to express a sentiment.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right, quickly, ladies, Mr. Har, then Ms. Dillon.
Yes, so from the Environmental Commission point of view, though we have not discussed this exact parking lot, there is concern about water quality. So I think that the Parks Commission, so I would suggest that either the Parks Commission, or if we're talking about actually designing a parking lot down the road, that issues of possible use of permeable pavement would be considered as well. Understanding that, first of all, that there are lots of opinions about the desirability to be sorted through, but let's not lose sight of that water quality issue as well.
Thank you. Ms. Dillon?
I would ask that city staff also provide in the meantime whether we have a written agreement with Annie's to use their parking lot. There's a lot of talk about people parking there. I'd like to know whether or not how they feel about that, and if there is some sort of an agreement that the city has with them to utilize that space, and how many spaces there are, and what the actual close proximity of on-street parking is, because we're talking about one ball field here. So you're talking probably 2 teams of kids, maybe 30 carloads of kids. So what exactly do we need for parking, and how often do we need it? I'd like to know what the statistics are for how often that park is used, and what the parking situation is. That park seems to be more of a neighborhood park that people walk to, other than for the baseball games. So I'm not sure that having a full-time parking lot is in the best interest of that area.
I can respond to your first question about an agreement with Annie's. There is an easement, an ingress and egress easement to simply travel across the parking lot. There is no agreement to park there. I believe that Annie's has allowed people to park there after hours out of their generosity. But otherwise that's a private property, and the owner obviously has the ability to enforce whatever they'd like to enforce. But now it's kind of for the most part, it's really a moot point, because there's no place to go, because the part at the end of the paved area is now, majority of that, right, is part of 207 Monroe Street, part of the new condominium development. So
There is, I would think, there isn't enough, you don't feel as though there's enough property behind the tennis court to have like a walkway path? Not a roadway, to where people could park at Annie's and have a path.
if Annie's chooses to let them park
That's
there.
what I guess
But that's totally up to them. Currently, there's no agreement with Annie's and the city to allow any kind of parking to take place on Annie's private property.
Okay.
And I guess if I could,
Well, we sort of encourage it, or at least we don't discourage it. So maybe we need to make that clear.
staff has made that clear to SYBNS. But I would have a question if I could. I mean, when you say you want statistics of the use of the park,
The ball field part.
The
part
ball,
of it.
the ball,
field.
okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you
sorry.
for that clarification.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that need to be worked through from the Parks Commission, but then also maybe, inviting some representatives from the Baseball Association to come and be part of that discussion too, because I feel like that is really the main use of the park as far as cars are concerned, because I think everybody else does just kind of walk over there.
I think that's an excellent
So,
suggestion.
and then also, I don't know if we can maybe get involved, or get in contact and have someone from Fairdine there as well, because my thought is that probably once that is built out, that there will be on-street parking of some sort in there, and that people will want to go and park in their spaces, so might extend an invitation to them
Yep,
as well.
we will. Mr. Seo?
I want to say that this is not an easy problem to deal with. My son played baseball in that park many years ago, now probably 25 years ago, and even then, parking was an issue in that particular ball field. And where you could park, where you couldn't park, who felt they controlled what property. I think that having the Parks Commission deal with this in public forum is an excellent idea and probably a good way to get all the issues aired.
Can you also make sure that Chris put something about this on Facebook? There's a lot of people who follow the city on Facebook and they might be interested. Okay, May 16th, thank you all. Moving on to the last discussion item, which is the Urban County Cooperative Agreement Extension. Ms. Tarr, do you want to take the lead on this real quick?
Yes, we received in our packets the notification that the notice that the agreement between the city and the county for the urban county is a 3-year agreement that automatically renews unless we specifically say we don't want to be involved. I would recommend continuing the relationship. I talked about the Washtenaw Urban County a couple of weeks ago when we passed the resolution about HUD funding, and I'd be happy to talk about it again, but I hope you remember at least a little bit of it and will simply agree with me that we should continue the relationship. I can say what it involves on our part is there are monthly meetings of the Urban County Executive Committee. The mayor or township managers normally sit on that group, but they are allowed to have designated persons representing them. I've been attending the Urban County Executive Committee for the last 4 years, I believe. It's an investment of about 2 hours a month of someone's time, and the benefits. We've seen benefits to Saline from this in the funding that we were able to receive, or that Saline Area Social Service was able to receive for facility improvements. There are other programs that benefit individual residents as well, and that's on a case-by-case basis. So the final thing I guess I would say is our being there increases by $10,000 to $11,000 a year approximately the amount of money that comes back to Washtenaw County that can be used in the county. And when we originally joined the Urban County, I think we did it not assuming that we would get money back, but based on the assumption that more of our tax dollars that come back to be used in our local area benefit Saline as well, even if they're not spent in our city limits.
I think that was said perfectly, Ms. Tahar. Linda has done an outstanding job representing Saline on the Urban County Executive Committee, and as she noted, this community directly benefited from funds that the Urban County decided to invest when Saline Social Services relocated from their former office space uptown to the current property that they occupied, the corner of Mills and Michigan Ave, which I think is a marvelous facility for that organization, which does important work. As Ms. Tahar indicated, our seat at the table brings some additional funds to Washtenaw County, and the funding that the Urban County Initiative distributes helps a lot of people in need in our area. And I think it's absolutely critical, especially at a time when we're so often inclined to forget about those who are sort of marginalized and in need of support. So I emphatically believe that we should continue to participate, and hopefully Linda will continue to represent us as well as she had in the past, and I'm sure between the two of us, we can address any questions and concerns that you may have.
Mr. Mayor?
Please.
I did also, I have a copy of the bylaws of the Urban County Executive Committee, should any member of council wish to read them. I did not make copies in order to save paper, but if anyone would like to have a copy, just let me know.
Very good. Any questions? Any objection to continuing our participation? Excellent. Mr. Gearbaugh?
No, I was just going to say, we participated in this for many years, and that we had the opportunity to actually get that funding for social services showed that it wasn't work that was lost. It got us our funding. So if we can continue to have that ability from this, I think we need to keep going for it.
Good. Okay, excellent. Thank you. If there's nothing further to be brought up under the discussion portion of our agenda, we come to the second public comment period under the Open Meetings Act. Any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council on any item. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? Please come to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Mary Bukema. I live at 217 Monroe, and I'm just here to say thank you for your thoughtfulness in this process of this possible parking lot in the park. We have observed as neighbors a lot of change on our street in the last several months, and we have a lot of new pavement going into land where we had foxes last year on the land. We look forward to hopefully having those animals back on our properties again this year. To have a parking lot for a sport that's really just a summer activity. Really appreciate your thoughtfulness with regard to how this operates. And we are the ones that also deal with the cars that park in front of our homes when there's on-street parking, and we'd rather see that happen than more pavement. So appreciate your thoughtfulness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate your comments. We welcome your attendance at our upcoming Parks Commission if that's your wish. Please, Karen.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to back her up and say thank you for listening and for letting us know the time and date and where to be, and we will come back and listen and talk. And thank you for the history, Todd. That was something I did not know, so that was nice to learn. Thank you. And actually, everybody said something, so thank you all.
I would like to thank the city for taking seriously the odor issues. Being a neighbor to the wastewater treatment plant is sort of an olfactory adventure, and it's nice to see that you're taking it seriously and that you have taken steps and you stayed with the problem, and I deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional citizen comments? Okay, friends, well then please note that we are going to have a special work meeting to discuss our budget next Monday, which would be the 8th at 7 p.m. following the LDFA, TIFA, and EDC meeting. And then we have a work meeting at 6 p.m. on the 15th to discuss a whole host of issues, a regular meeting that follows at 7:30, and then we do have that Economic Development 101 on the 22nd at 6:30 p.m. We've also invited members of Saline Main Street, the Chamber, and our Economic Development Boards to attend that as well. There are no absences this evening, so the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 9:01 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. This meeting is